Today we are going to be talking about water quality, and we're actually going to be creating books. And these books can be a digital book or they could be a book on paper, right? That's going to be up to you. I know some of you guys do amazing digital stuff, but if digital stuff is not your thing, paper is totally fine. We're going to be learning about 4 factors that affect water quality. And we're going to be learning basically kind of how we test for them. And this is a precursor to the lab that we're going to be doing on October 20th. So on October 20th, we are going to be, no, hold on one second, I have to yell at my dog. Out, out.
Me too.
Anyways, actually he's doing much better. Last year I had to yell at him like every session all the time, but not so much this year. Then on October 20th, when we have our first lab, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at 3 samples of water, and we're going to be doing water quality testing on the samples. So one of them will be rainwater, which I am collecting outside my house. And one of them will be from Johnson's Creek. And then the other water sample will be tap water from the school. And so we're going to look at different factors in that water, and we're going to talk about what it means for water to be clean, etc. So let's start off here by looking at our PowerPoint. As a note/reminder, which I forgot to put it in this PowerPoint as well, October 13th, right, there is no school and no virtual session. Oops, I just deleted everything. So on October 13th, it is a Friday, it's next Friday, we have no school, yay. So we won't be having virtual sessions. If you try to log into the virtual session, obviously I will not be there. All right, I'm
still have stuff that's due that day. Is it like, do we actually?
Yeah, so you shouldn't have any assignments due on that day. If you do, I would let that teacher know, like even if it's me, because I might have mistaken. For some reason, I keep thinking everything is happening on the 13th, and I'm like completely thinking it's a Monday and a Thursday.
Oh my gosh, it's Friday the 13th.
Yeah. So if you do see an assignment due on the 13th, just let that teacher know, because there shouldn't be assignments due on the 13th. Okay. So then they'll probably move it to the 12th, so I would be ready to do it early. All right. We
don't have school on the 12th either.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know about that. Let me check the calendar. Pretty sure assignments can be due on the 12th. Could be wrong.
It's like teacher and service day or something like that.
That's the 13th. Let me see. Where's the calendar at? So I'm seeing nope. So the 12th you do have school, but it is progress report day. So that's actually the day that teachers will be putting in your progress reports. And obviously you can already kind of know what your grade is for that, because you could just check out what your grade is in Canvas, right? And unless you don't turn anything in until then, it's probably going to be pretty similar. So the 12th you do have school, so you can have stuff due on the 12th. The 13th is no school, no virtual sessions. All of the teachers will actually be in Salem. We're going to a conference. So we will not really be available on that day either. Okay. So water quality. What we're going to do first is talk about our objectives. We're going to be creating a water quality book that describes the different types of testing we can do for water. And that's going to help us prepare for our first lab, which we'll also kind of talk about as we go. So our warm-up question is, why is the urban water cycle, in this case, the water cycle happening in an urban environment, more likely to cause flooding? So when you think of an answer for this one, if you could just pop it into the chat, why is the urban water cycle more likely to cause flooding? Juliana gave us a great option here. There isn't as much foliage to soak up the water. Love that use of the word foliage. 100% right. There's less plants. That's one reason flooding is going to happen. Why else? More concrete. True. What else? What does that more concrete mean? Like, what is that preventing if there's a bunch of concrete?
Drainage.
No drainage. Thank you, Sydney. Exactly, right? So that water is not going back into the ground, right? I'm getting stored as groundwater or in an aquifer or flowing in the ground to a river or ocean, right? It's stuck on top of that concrete. So it's going to just keep moving until it finds a place that it can pool, right? Basically, gravity is going to come into effect. The lowest point is going to have the most water. All right, I think you guys got the concept here, but concrete is a killer. And we did talk about last time, right, that porous concrete where water can actually soak through, which we have here, but of course that's not every road and not every situation that you see concrete. So, water quality book. These are the options for how you can make this book. What I want you to do is, as we're going through this today, you could actually be writing notes or setting up your book as we go. This PowerPoint is posted now in Canvas with the exit ticket, so you can always go back, right? So if you're a person who spends a lot of time on your project work, you're a perfectionist, right? Don't rush through it right now. Just, it's all going to be there and available to you. So I would be writing notes down though of exactly what you're going to do. So right now I want you to type in the chat, which one of these three options do you think you're going to choose? If you're making a book about water quality, are you going to do a paper book, a PowerPoint, or a Word document, Google Doc book situation? I'm seeing PowerPoint, paper, PowerPoint, paper. No one's taking up Google Doc template. Yeah, I don't actually think those exist, so you would have to create it. So that would be the hardest. Okay, good. So people doing PowerPoint or people doing paper. So if you're doing a PowerPoint, think about each slide being a new page. If you're doing paper, you probably want to get some computer paper, or you could use construction paper or some kind of paper that doesn't have lines. I'm going to use this graph paper that I've written all over for math. And you're probably going to want to fold that paper and make a book that way, or you could just have the papers together be a book, right? Doesn't actually have to look like a book, but it's a concept of a book. So the first thing that you're going to have in your book is a cover page, right? So if you're doing a PowerPoint, this will be the first slide. If you're doing a book, this is going to be your first page, the cover. Make sure on your cover you have your name, pretty easy. The title of the project, water quality testing project. And then a picture or pictures that represent water quality. So if you're doing a paper book, you could hand draw or design those pictures. You could also use Google Images, right? You could even put videos, right? This is your cover page, so make it cool, make it creative. I'm not going to give you time right now to make it, but that is something that you're going to be doing for the final part of this. And you may be thinking, okay, so what are we going to do with these books? So we are going to turn them in. If you're doing a paper book, you're going to either take pictures or if you come to the lab in person, you could physically hand the book in to me. If you're doing a PowerPoint, then obviously you can just turn it in like a regular assignment, right? But this is going to be part of the components. We're not going to be able to finish the book until we do the lab. So you're going to have a lot of time to be working on it. After our cover page, we're going to have a table of contents page, which I just put page numbers here. You might have different page numbers, right? This would also be your slide number. So dissolved oxygen might be on slide 1. You could even write that slide 3, slide 6, whatever. If you're doing a paper book, right, then obviously you might want to number the pages and say what page it's on. Pretty easy. But these are the 5 things that we're going to have in the book. Actually, we're going to have 6 because we're also going to have a conclusion. So let me actually add that. So we're going to have information because we're basically making an informational book. It's freaking out my PowerPoint. We're making an informational book about water quality. So we're going to have also a conclusion, which will be short. So if we're making a book about water quality, right, the first part of the book is going to be kind of like the background information. What are these things that we're looking at? Where do they come from? And, you know, basically how are humans ruining water, etc. Right? We're not going to focus only on that, although it is something to be thinking about. So once you have your table of contents done, then we're going to start talking. This is the notes portion. It might be helpful for you to write these things down right now. Like I said, this will be available to you in the assignment so that you can see it. So dissolved oxygen is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It is the amount of oxygen that is dissolved. Oh, I have low battery. I might have to go get my charger. It is the amount of oxygen that is dissolved in water. Okay, so really quickly, while I am grabbing my charger, you guys could actually open up a PowerPoint right now. You could start typing out your cover page and working on your table of contents page. I am going to run and grab my charger from the other room. It'll take me about 5 seconds. Okay. I'm back. So, dissolved oxygen is that amount of oxygen that's actually dissolved in water, right? And we might be thinking, well, why do we care about that? Hello, stuff in the water needs oxygen, right? Fish need oxygen. Plants use oxygen, but they don't necessarily need it from the water. But any living organism in the water that is an animal or basically not a plant is going to need oxygen. Bacteria need oxygen. So how do we test and measure it? Well, the exciting thing is that pretty much all of these tests, we're going to be using a tablet. So what actually ends up happening is we'll take a test tube of our water sample. We'll take a tablet that says dissolved oxygen on it. We'll put it inside. We'll cap it. We'll shake it for however much time it tells us. And then we're going to look at the color. So the color will actually tell us how much oxygen is in that water. Let me see if I can find a picture of our test results thing. Test results chart water quality. See if it shows up. It's going to look like this. So this is an example of kind of how our test kit is going to look. But basically, we can measure the dissolved oxygen in parts per million, right? So that's basically saying if we have 1 million parts, how many parts are oxygen. 0 parts per million would be really bad. That means there's no oxygen and stuff is dying. 4 is it's like the water stuff can probably live in it, but 8 or higher is amazing, right? So the more dissolved oxygen we have, the better, because really there's only so much oxygen that can dissolve. We also are going to be looking at the pH, which we'll come back to in a second, but it's a color type thing as well. And then turbidity is something that we could analyze. We're not going to be analyzing for our particular experiment here. Really, it's more like an observation because we're not actually making variables, but still. So it's measured in parts per million, and it is measured using a test kit or a dissolved oxygen tablet. There's also a test kit that involves like 17 different chemicals, and it's like super high tech and chemistry oriented. We do not have one of those, so we're not going to be doing that test, but it gives you a more specific amount of oxygen. So we're actually going to watch a little video of someone doing the complicated chemistry test just because it's cool. Oops. And that will give us an idea of kind of like how, if you as a scientist, your whole job was finding water quality, you would probably be doing this test. So notice there's tons of different stuff here. And of course, they're all, you know, fancy, where they're like, oh, we'll clean up your area, put a paper towel.
Add 8 drops of magnesium sulfate to the water sample. The drops will sink.
But this is the official way to do it. You add 8 drops of something called magnesium or manganese sulfate, which I can't even say. Which we'll see this lady do here. Then we add another compound.
Alkaline potassium iodine azides to the water sample.
And I wish this was like sped up so that we didn't have to like sit and watch her put the drops in, because that's not really the main point here. And I can't skip without. Okay. So you go through a bunch of steps, right? And then you're going to end up getting this weird color in the bottle. There's a bunch more steps, blah, blah, blah. I don't really care about the steps here because we're not going to do this particular experiment, but I want to see the results. So basically what she's doing is she's taking a final chemical here and adding it to our water, and she's going to be looking at when it turns clear. And literally one drop can change it, which is crazy. So she's going to keep adding until eventually we end up see it starting to get lighter. So as you start adding this chemical, it gets lighter and lighter, and when it turns clear, you actually can read how much you added of the chemical, and it'll tell you how much dissolved oxygen is in that water. So she had to add a lot. That's a good sign. That means there's a lot of oxygen in that sample. Right, so now the water is completely clear, so she can get a reading. And I can't remember if this video tells us, but
syringe. Read the number where the large ring of the plunger stopped. Record this number on your data sheet.
I wonder if she tells us what hers was.
Empty the sample water
No.
bottle.
Well, regardless, you would record the number there, and it would actually tell you how much oxygen is in the water. Okay. So the next step of this process really is thinking about what affects these factors. So dissolved oxygen in particular can easily be influenced by stuff in the environment. Temperature. So we're going to make a little bit of notes, extra notes here. You might want to write these things down because they'll only be in the recorded version of this. They won't be on the PowerPoint. But cold water equals more dissolved oxygen. Right? The colder the water is, the more oxygen that's able to dissolve. So if water is too warm, that could be a problem, right? If it's super cold, that usually is a good indicator that there's probably a lot of dissolved oxygen. Wind. How do you guys think wind might affect the dissolved oxygen? It would increase the amount, Juliana says. I would agree with you, right? Wind equals more DO, because then there's actually more oxygen being brushed across the water or introduced to the water, right? The same thing is going to be true about a current. Like a fast moving river equals more dissolved oxygen. So you guys might notice, like if you ever go to the river or lakes frequently, or bodies of water where there's movement, where do lots of animals live? They live, they live where the current is moving, usually, right? Some things live where it's not moving, but when rivers are moving, more oxygen is getting dissolved in the water. Oh, I said rast, not fast. No, I said fast. My voice is a little, wrote, thank you. I was like, said. Oops, I don't know if I can get back into that text box. Let's see. It won't let me. Come on, thing. Annotating on Zoom is really hard, guys. We'll just do this. Fast. Okay. There we go. So fast-moving river is more dissolved oxygen. Wind means more dissolved oxygen. Cold water means more dissolved oxygen. And then last but not least, we're going to be really talking about our bacteria, feces, and plants. So what do we know about plants? Do plants produce oxygen or use oxygen? I'm glad you guys are enjoying my technology difficulties. So plants use oxygen, Yelena says. Amanda also says they do, but they also produce it, right? So more plants equals more dissolved oxygen, because they will use some of the oxygen, but they produce much more than they use. What about bacteria? Do they use oxygen or do they produce it? They use. So more bacteria actually equals less dissolved oxygen, right? Because they're going to be taking in that oxygen in order to live, and they don't produce oxygen, and they're not putting it back in the water. Same thing if you have a lot of feces, which is the fancy science word for poop. If you have a lot of poop in the water, you're going to have less dissolved oxygen, because that means there's more bacteria, and therefore there's less oxygen. Okay, so that's important to think about, especially when we're thinking about swimming. You don't want to swim in water that has poop in it, I would hope, right? And so they do tests for those kinds of things to make sure there's not sewage getting in to the beach, for example, or lakes or rivers that people are swimming in. So those are the factors that influence dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen is one of the only factors really that changes pretty drastically, because as you can tell, there's a ton of stuff that can affect it. So why do we care about dissolved oxygen? So here's a little short video. Fish may be harmed in this video. Don't be upset about it, it's science. So that's the type of fish it is, the Chana punctuus. This is 0 milligrams per liter, almost no oxygen. What are the fish, what are they doing? Dying, yeah, right? They're laying on the bottom like, last opportunity here to live. And Shelby's right, they're not moving, they're conserving energy because they are basically running out of oxygen. That fish is like, let me try. Okay, no. Nope, not enough oxygen. He tried to make a sprint for it, but he didn't make it. Okay, then I believe they show another tank, I think. We'll see. But basically, if you ever see a fish tank and they're all at the bottom of the tank looking like this, there's probably too little oxygen. Don't worry, I don't think they actually died. Yeah, Petco, they probably have bad dissolved oxygen levels. I'm pretty sure as soon as the fish were about to die, they pumped oxygen back in there. Okay, does it go to a different tank? I can't remember. Maybe not. Maybe they just, oh, okay. So now they're actually pumping oxygen into the tank. How do I know? Right, you see all those bubbles? Those are air bubbles. Right, don't worry, the fish don't die, guys. They don't die. They're just suffering a little bit, but they're getting a lot of oxygen right now. So now we have 5 milligrams in that tank, this tank. We might have even more. Nope, still 5. But notice, now the fish can move around, right? They're not going crazy because they're fish, but you can see the air bubbles in there, and you can actually see that oxygen getting put into the water. So this is why, if you have a fish tank, right, or if you've seen fish tanks, what do you see? You see air bubbles, right? Air is being pumped into the water to keep the dissolved oxygen levels high enough so that the fish can survive, right? I remember when Hurricane Ike happened. This was like in 2008, so quite a while ago, but I was living in New York and my parents were living in Texas and they didn't have power for like 2 weeks. And my mom called me and was like, can you Google what I should do for my fish? I don't want them to die. Because the power was out and her electric pump to pump water into her tank wasn't working, right? So she actually, every 2 hours, took a cup and moved the water around a bunch to create that air bubble and to create that current to keep the fish alive. And they actually all survived, right? So that's something to think about when you see fish tanks with that air getting pumped in. It's not just for looks, it's actually so the fish can live. Okay, so then this is a graphic kind of showing us like how much dissolved oxygen organisms need. So notice worms, they don't really need very much, right? So for example, if we took like a sampling of a river or a lake and we looked at the organisms that were in there, if we saw mostly worms, that would not be a good sign, right? As we go up here, a spot fish doesn't need too much, 2 milligrams per liter, blue crabs, 3 milligrams per liter, clams, flounders, and then bass, right? So, and then of course, this is only a small sampling of fish. Other fish are gonna have different requirements, and other crabs or other crustaceans are gonna have different requirements for amounts of oxygen as well. But basically, if we take, for example, our Johnson's Creek water, when we test dissolved oxygen of it, we'll talk a little bit about how it's not gonna be super accurate, but if we get a dissolved oxygen level that's really low, then we'll know that not a lot of stuff is going to survive in there. So the next type of thing is phosphates and nitrates. And what I want you guys to think about is as we go through each of these topics, right, in your book, you're going to want to be giving background information on this. So for dissolved oxygen, maybe you find your own video of fish in different dissolved oxygens or pictures of like this of what different fish need, right? And you kind of explain what it is. You don't have to include every single thing I said, right? But include some information so that if I'm looking at your book, I'm like, oh, dissolved oxygen, that's what it is. Phosphates and nitrates. Now, these are actually caused by humans for the most part in multiple ways, which we'll talk about. So first of all, they do naturally occur, right? They're not like something we invented, but they're really low amounts in water and in nature. Fertilizer has a ton of them, right? Because we actually found out that if you put phosphates and nitrates on plants, they grow like crazy, right? It actually stimulates their growth. So they're necessary for plants, but usually in the natural world, fertilizer is not there. Also, something to think about is phosphates and nitrates can come from waste as well, right? So dog poop. Put a 1 in the chat if you have ever stepped in dog poop because some irresponsible dog owner did not pick up their dog's poop. Seeing lots of 1s. Put a 2 if you somehow have never stepped in dog poop, which I will shake your hand virtually over that. Oh, Elena, lucky you. Do you not walk in the grass? Maybe not. So, right, there's tons of dog poop around. Guess what happens when it rains? All that dog poop gets washed into the sewer or into water sources, right? Same with fertilizer. If you live near farms, or you have a farm, or you have a huge garden and you're using tons of fertilizer, you are contributing to the problem of phosphates and nitrates. We talked a little bit about why this is bad last week when we talked about eutrophication, right? One of my favorite science words. Because phosphates and nitrates cause plants and algae to grow, they grow out of control, and then they kill everything else, right? The other problem that we end up seeing, right, eutrophication is described right here in this first paragraph, we talked about that already, is that nitrate levels can actually specifically impact humans. If there's high nitrate levels in water, it can actually kill babies, right? Because they have a small body mass. So if they get some nitrogen in them, it can actually kill them, right? So this is something that is obviously heavily monitored in drinking water. We don't want people getting sick or dying because of nitrogen levels in the water. So it can kill organisms through eutrophication, and also just high levels of nitrogen and phosphates are not good for us, right? Specifically, nitrate can cause you to get sick and or possibly die depending on your size and how much nitrogen you were exposed to. So how do we test for them? It's going to be the same way. We're going to use a tablet. It's going to be the same thing. There's going to be different colors, and we're actually going to be able to tell how much is in the water. Now for these, we want less of them, right? Ideally, we want 0, but if we have a tiny amount, that'll be okay. If we see high amounts, that's where we're going to be like, uh-oh, this isn't good. Next factor is pH. So type a 1 in the chat if you have seen the pH scale before, you're kind of familiar with it, you know kind of what pH is. Type a 2 if you're like, pH, I've never heard of it, I have no idea what it is. Awesome, I'm so glad most of you guys, actually it looks like everyone who has responded so far, I'm in between. Okay, good, because we're gonna review it. But most of us have at least heard of pH, right? Which if you have studied it in depth, you will know that it stands for potential hydrogen, right? And in chemistry, you'll learn more about how to calculate all that stuff. There's math involved. We're not gonna do that. We just wanna know about the scale. Right, so we know that 0 is the most acidic, and that this scale is a little bit different than normal scales because the ends are extreme and the middle is neutral. So as we get towards 1 and 0, we get towards acids. As we get up here towards 13 and 14, we get towards bases. You might also see the word alkaline, which means the same thing as base. We also know that the middle of the scale is neutral, right? And this should be, as it says here, distilled water. So distilled water is completely neutral. It's equal amounts of acid and base in that sample. So then we can look here at some of these examples of things and where they fall on the scale. So at the very bottom down here, we see gastric acid. Guess what that is? Throw up, right? If you've ever thrown up, you felt the burning, right? That was actually literally burning you because an acid was exposed to your tissues, right? It's stomach fluid. Your stomach actually has a lining of mucus that protects it from getting burned. Your throat doesn't have that. So when you throw up, you feel it. Lemon juice. Who's gotten lemon juice in a cut? Not fun, right? Same thing. It's an acid. It's burning. Orange juice, tomato juice, coffee, right? All of these things you might have drank before or eaten before, right? Some people actually end up getting acid reflux from these, right? It causes that acid to sort of come up into the esophagus a little bit and cause you some pain. Urine, your pee, right, is actually slightly acidic. Not as acidic as stomach acid, right, but more acidic than water. If we go on the other side of the scale, seawater is slightly basic. Baking soda, right, which is in like toothpaste especially. Milk of magnesia, you might have had to drink that if you have ever been constipated. Ammonia solution, right, that's bleach. Soapy water is basic as well, right? Soap is a super, super strong base. And bleach is up here pretty much at the top, right? And the same thing kind of happens with bases. When they're really strong, like bleach, you can actually get burned from bleach. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that or experienced that. I have before. Once I was trying to bleach something in a sink and I wasn't wearing gloves because I thought I didn't put that much, and I ended up burning my hand. Very painful. Sydney suggests something interesting: baking soda and lemon juice together. So guess what? If we did that, we would almost get a neutral substance depending on how much we mix, right? So that's the thing. If you take an acid plus a base and you mix them together and they're in the same amount, you get water and a salt. So that might be worth writing down as well, that an acid plus a base equals a salt plus water. And that's pretty harmful. So if you ever work in a chemistry lab or go to a really fancy chemistry lab, if you go to college or take chemistry classes, you will see that if you spill an acid on the floor, what do? They pour a base on it, right? And then it becomes water, and then you could, in theory, touch it and it would be totally fine, right? Obviously, you want someone who's experienced and knows what they're doing, and not just pouring stuff together and trying to make water. Oh, Sydney's saying if you mix them together, you can use it to whiten your teeth. Yeah, right? Same with like baking soda and coconut oil, charcoal even, right? There's a bunch of different compounds that you can mix for teeth whitening, but interesting. That would be a little experience in the mouth, right? Lemon juice and baking soda. So really, when we look at this scale, if we're talking about water quality, we're not super interested in most of these because water is pretty much going to be between 6 and 9, right? If we had water with a pH of 2 or a pH of 12, that would be insane, right? It could happen, but that would be super polluted, like out of control water. I don't think any of the water that we're going to look at is going to be like that. Water should be a 7. Right? If we're talking about the ocean, it should be an 8. So when we take our sample of water, we usually expect it to be somewhere between 7 and 8. It might be in the 6. It might go down even into the upper 5s, 5.8, 5.9. We will find out, right? But we expect that our pH is going to be pretty close to neutral. You have a pH inside your body. Does anybody know what the pH of your body is? So the pH of your body is 7.4. So slightly basic. That's right. We're all basic a little bit. But not a lot, right? And your body works very hard to maintain that exact pH. pH of a fish tank, that's going to depend. Are you talking about a saltwater fish tank or a freshwater fish tank? And depending on the type of fish you have, it will tell you what pH you should keep it at. It will be close to 7. It might not be exactly 7. It might be 7.4. It might be 8, right? It might be 6.5, depending on the type of fish and organisms you have in there. All right. So again, this is what I kind of just said, but in words, 14 and 1 are super dangerous, right? They're a lot of times more acidic or basic than water. To test the pH, you can use pH strips or tablets. We're going to use a tablet, just like for the dissolved oxygen and the phosphates and nitrates. We're going to take a test tube of water, put the tablet in, shake it up, and then we will see the color. And this is where we will actually be seeing these colors, right? Where we'll probably see something in the yellow to greenish range. Again, if we see 4, 5, 9, or 10, that's a super, super bad sign, right? But it could happen, especially if you're testing really gross water. None of the water we're testing is that gross. Well, at least I hope not. So yeah, we're going to be testing water, 3 kinds of water for all these different things on our next lab, which is the 20th. So hopefully you guys can come in person for that, by the way. It's going to be at 11, the same time as our virtual session on Friday the 20th. If you don't come in person and you come virtually, I'm going to be showing all the stuff on the camera. But it won't be quite as fun because you're not going to get to actually do the testing yourself. So this is the most commonly assessed chemical test, pH, right? Because pH is more than just water quality. We want to know the pH of pretty much everything so that we can determine if it's safe and figure out sort of what uses it might have, etc. Our last and final test, which I think is the most interesting one, is called fecal coliform. And that word fecal comes from the word feces, right? This is poop bacteria. So this is especially from sewage overflow, right? You guys might be surprised to learn that sewage overflow happens all the time. Do you have to go on campus to do the lab? No, you can tune in virtually and see the lab and participate with us who are on campus. It would be cool to see the Willamette. I agree. I actually live right next to it, but I don't know if I could get to it to get a water sample. I might try. But basically, sewage overflow is happening all the time, right? So I used to live in New York, and there's like a really famous beach there, Coney Island. You guys might have seen it or been there even. And probably like at least 60% of the time, Coney Island has a pretty high amount of fecal coliform in it, right? And it's not because people are going to the beach and pooping in the water, it's because of sewage overflow, right? So you can actually look that information up about water. If it's a public source of water that you can swim in or go to, right, then they should have information about the quality of the water. Might be kind of hard, but you can find it. So Haley asked how long the book needs to be. Yeah, it needs to be 7 pages approximately, right? You might have it be longer depending on how many slides you want to do for each topic. Like for dissolved oxygen, maybe you want to do 3 slides. So then you'll just adjust your pages as appropriate. But thank you, Ian, for saying 7, because that's what I had in my table of contents. If you want to do the lab on campus, it will be on October 20th at 11 a.m. It's on the home page of the course, in case you forget, right? October 20th, 11 a.m. All right, so if we have more bacteria, we already talked about this, right? We have lower dissolved oxygen, and then what happens? Stuff dies. So this test, this is what it's going to look like. It takes longer. It's not instant. It takes 3 days because the bacteria have to grow and produce a reaction. So when we see a red color like this, that's a positive result. That means that there is a pretty high amount of fecal coliform or bacteria from waste in that water. If we get a yellow result like this, that means that there is not a significant amount. Again, real water quality testers, they can get this down to like the exact number of how much fecal coliform there is, not just that it's there or not. Just so this, if we're going to use a tablet, And it's going to take 3 days. So we're actually going to have to wait to find out the results of this one. We're not going to know on the day that we do it. And they test beaches and drinking water and lakes and everything for fecal coliform, right? They also test for E. coli a lot of times, and they can do other bacterial tests as well. So I wanted to show you guys this because I thought this was pretty interesting. If you do a little bit of Googling, you can come across a lot of information about real scientists doing this work. And I found this data report from the Columbia River, which is close to us, right? It's from 2009, because they take a long time to publish these things. But essentially, they're going to tell us about, this is all the different water quality data that they found. And they did it at different sites on the river. So they found the temperature, which can be important, right? We're not going to take the temperature of our samples just because they're all going to have sat around for a while, and therefore they'll probably all be the same temperature. They tested the conductivity, or how well the water could carry an electric charge. They tested the dissolved oxygen. They tested the turbidity, which is actually how cloudy the water is, right? You guys know, like, if you go in the Columbia River, it's not the prettiest river, and it feels kind of slimy in there. The turbidity is not super great. You can't really see all the way to your feet if you're standing in the water. E. coli is a kind of bacteria that they tested for rather than fecal coliform, right? So I just wanted to show you guys that we're not going to like look through all of this, but they basically have a map of all the different sites they did. Like, this is real science that people are currently doing now, right? That's why we're learning about it. This is something that we need to keep monitoring. Blah, 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 maps of where they took all their testing. They describe, this is exactly like how your book is going to look. It's going to say dissolved oxygen. It's going to tell me about dissolved oxygen. And then they included a picture, right? Because in this case, they're telling us about salmon. Salmon are happiest in water that is 5 to 13 degrees Celsius, right? 25 degrees Celsius is considered lethal for salmon. What is 25 degrees Celsius in Fahrenheit? Let's find out. $77. So if salmon are in water that's 77 degrees, that could kill them, right? So in this case, that's definitely why they're actually monitoring temperature in this study, because of course everything in the Pacific Northwest revolves around the salmon, right? Then they talk about the temperatures, blah, blah, blah. They give you a bunch of data. Then they talk about conductivity. What is it, right? How does it work? Here's a guy collecting data on the conductivity. They give us the data. Dissolved oxygen, what is it? They give us a picture, some data, etc. So this is kind of like what we're going to be doing. Someone is asking, Shelby's asking, is the book due on the 20th as well? No, right? The 20th, we're going to do the lab. And then I will probably give you guys a week, if not a few days. I don't know exactly which date I had it due on. I don't have it showing up yet for you. But you'll have days. We have to wait for the fecal coliform, which I won't be able to look at until Tuesday. So it probably won't be due until Thursday the 26th or Friday the 27th. So you'll have time after the data to add that to your book and work on your conclusion. Okay, so really what I wanted to get at here is that people are actually testing this stuff all the time, and that's why we have safe water, right? Because it's constantly being tested and monitored and adjusted. Okay, so the final thing here is our exit question, which again, this PowerPoint is available to you, so if you weren't writing every detail down, you can always go back to look. But if you're asked by the government to determine if water was safe, they are paying you a lot of money. So you better be right? How would you test the water and what would you look for? So how would you test? Tell me like which tests you would do and why, and what kind of results we would expect to see. you might have to do some research on this, because I did not tell you exact values for phosphates and nitrates, for example. Fecal coliform, I just told you positive or negative, but it would not hurt you to Google water quality test and see what test results are out there and what they actually say, and if you can interpret them, right? Because the whole goal here is that, like, why are we publishing all this stuff if people can't look at it and say, oh, this water's dirty or this water's clean? So use at least 3 vocabulary words. Those could be dissolved oxygen, phosphate, fecal coliform. They could be other vocabulary words from the course, hydrosphere, water cycle, something like that. But I'm going to be looking for those vocab words. So that is your exit question, is if you're asked, how would you tell if the water was safe? Try to give me more than 2 sentences here, right? Really think about it. Like, if someone was actually paying you to do this, what would you do? Okay, so that is the end of our lesson here. And the exit ticket should be showing up for you guys now. Haley has a good suggestion about possibly doing the coliform test early, which I might do. Oh, what is the code word? That is a good question. Let me actually look at what I wrote down it was. All right, you guys are going to like this one. Code word is going to be popped into the chat. No, that was the code word for biology. They're all different. Haley, trying to guess the code word. That's our code word for this week. So
I will never let go, Jack.
So when you turn in your exit ticket, just make sure you pop that code word in. If you don't know the code word because you weren't able to attend live, you're still going to be able to get a 90% by answering that exit question. Again, if this is something that interests you, right, this is a possible career. Most of those people who, very funny, Sydney, who do the water quality testing, right, they went to school and they got a degree in biology or environmental science or something like that, and now they go out and collect data, right, and analyze it. So that is a possible job opportunity if that's something that interests you. All right, otherwise, if you guys have questions, you know, about this assignment, about other assignments, again, the due date is going to be post October 20th, probably the 26th that will be due, possibly later, depending on how long we have to wait for the coliform test, which I just realized I'll be out of town, so if someone wants to send me a picture. Regardless, it will be due after the 20th. Otherwise, I hope some of you guys can come in to MIWA on the 20th so that we can do that water quality testing together. All right, so next week, enjoy your day off, and I will see you guys on the 20th.